Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. Happy you can join us to sort of dive into a lot of diverse NFL issues right now. Clearly, we have just exited the Combine. My partner, Myles Simmons, is back in Los Angeles. I am back in Brooklyn. We are joined together by the miracle of Zoom. And we've got a lot to talk about, really, that it's kind of an interesting setting up to be a very interesting week in pro football. First, our guest this week. I interviewed Alabama quarterback Bryce Young at the Combine, so we're going to hear from Bryce Young. You'll also get to see him. This just in, he's not tall. Elsewhere, topics that we have. Derek Carr to the Saints, where that leaves the quarterback market. It's franchise tag time, and my guess, barring some feverish negotiations by the Ravens or Giants, and you'll probably know by the time you listen to this podcast, certainly soon after that, what's going to happen to Lamar Jackson and Daniel Jones. The world awaits Aaron Rodgers' decision in Green Bay. The first pick of the draft is for sale, and it's not going to come cheap. If you read Football Morning in America this week, you basically will understand that I interviewed Ryan Poles, the Chicago GM, the holder of the pick. He already, 7 weeks out from the draft, has one offer that will net him a first-round pick in 24 and 25 by moving down. Carolina fascinates me. They got the 9th pick in the draft. They've got a very impatient owner. I don't know what they're going to do, Myles Simmons, but they're going to do something. So my Carson Wentz is a monstrous disappointment take has drawn fire. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what we've learned from the Combine. And finally, we will delve into free agency and why, in my opinion, free agency is going to be lousy in 2023. There's just not enough good players in the market, and we'll talk about that coming up in a bit. So, a little bit of an edit in the podcast this week. As we prepared to post the podcast just after 6 p.m. on Monday, the Eastern time, the Seattle Seahawks and quarterback Geno Smith agreed to a 3-year contract worth a little bit more than $100 million. It was reported by, I think, thescore.com, and I'm not familiar with thescore.com, but this is the way that this was probably going anyway. And I guess I'll just make one point about this. And the reason that I wanted to make this insert into the program is because 2 things happened that are really important, at least in my mind. Number one, this is basically Derek Carr has a 3-year, $100 million contract. Okay. And what happened with Geno Smith in getting 3 years and $105 million, as Jordan Schultz, if that's accurate, of the Score has reported. I think it's fair and right that Geno Smith edged out Derek Carr for a very simple reason. Geno Smith played very well this year, and that's all you have to go by. Derek Carr didn't play well this year, was unceremoniously benched at the end of the year, and then didn't even finish the year with the team. So I'm not saying that Derek Carr is unsalvageable. I don't believe he's unsalvageable. But what I am saying is Geno Smith, just by virtue of the Derek Carr contract, deserved to make more. And he will make a little bit more. And this says one other thing to me about Seattle. Okay, Seattle basically gave this job to Geno Smith in training camp 2022. He earned it, and also the lack of availability of Drew Lock basically affected what happened in this. But what is so good about this is this team loves Geno Smith. GM John Schneider, Coach Pete Carroll, they love Geno Smith because they said to him, hey, this is a meritocracy. We want you to win this job. We want you to play great. Now he's played great. And now, for the first time in his life, he's got more than a little bit of security. So I'm really happy for Geno Smith. And I'm glad for the Seahawks, too, because it would have been very easy for them to say, whoa, 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 whoa. We're not paying you $34 million a year. Look, you know what? It's crazy. You got to pay what the market will bear. And finally, what I would say about this is what's great about it for Seattle and the future, they don't have to take a quarterback at number 5. They now don't have to move up to try to get a quarterback. And I'm not saying they won't take a quarterback if a guy who they absolutely love is at number 5. But this allows the Seahawks, if they so choose, to get, in my opinion, the second best non-quarterback in this draft. I love it for Seattle, having the 5th pick, not having to use it on a quarterback. It allows them to get a little bit richer in an important spot of the roster, whether you view that as a pass rusher, which they may do, whether maybe they take a chance on Jalen Carter. Who knows if he's sitting there at number 5. Anyway, we're going to move on with the regular podcast, but I did want to be able to insert this just to be current as you listen to the Peter King podcast. So, Myles Simmons, how are you? You got back from Indianapolis okay? We saw each other. We had some fun. We had dinner Friday night at a nice Italian place in Indianapolis. You helped me raise a lot of money for Teachers Treasures in Indianapolis. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And hello, hello, hello.
Well, that was certainly my pleasure. What a great event that was Friday night at the Sun King Brewery. And not only did we get to raise a lot of money, but we also had some pretty good beer. So, I mean, I don't know what could be better than that, Peter.
Yeah, it's funny. People over the years, the last couple of years since I've been doing these events with Teachers Treasures as a beneficiary, I say, it's kind of like doing something to help some branch of the military. Who can be against that? Right. Who can be against helping people defending our country? Who can be against raising money so that teachers in some poor school districts in central Indiana will be able to go out and once a year spend $500, or I'm sorry, spend $0 and get $500 worth of school supplies for their classroom. Our thanks, by the way, to the Indianapolis Colts for a bunch of auction items. Our thanks to Shane Steichen of the Colts for coming by. And our thanks to Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, who donated $10,000 to the cause. And so it was really, really a fun night. Myles, I think just to put one small bow on this, I would love you to explain. Look, I've been going to Indianapolis for, I think this is my 24th scouting combine in Indianapolis, but I'll ask you this question. For those who really don't understand why Indianapolis is sort of nirvana to hold the scouting combine, you have the floor. Explain, please.
Well, for your 24th, it was my 7th, I think. And, it's just so easy to get around Indianapolis. It's so easy to see everybody you could possibly want to see. I mean, you wrote it in your column, you're hanging out with an NFL executive and you go on a nice little walk, but you really weren't ever very far from the center of everything, which is either the JW Marriott or kind of the convention center or Lucas Oil Stadium, I guess, depending on your perspective. But I mean, everything is connected by the skywalk, unless I guess you're at the hotel that we were at this year, but that's neither here nor there. And also you've got everybody together in such a close setting. And so that's why when people talk about, oh, it could move to Dallas, could be here in Los Angeles, could be in these different places, you're never going to get that same sort of everybody is in the same place and everybody can go and walk. And about 10 to 15 minutes later, they're going to see somebody that they really want to see who's also in the NFL. It's one of these very, very special times. And frankly, I love it because you get to see people that you don't usually get to see who and who work in this business. So selfishly, I would love it to stay there because I think it's awesome. And you just don't get that same feel, I think, if it's in LA and, you've got the convention center at one place, but then the hospitals are in a different place. And then that's the other critical part of this, right? It's about medical information and testing and those kinds of things. So yeah, if it's somewhere else, it's never going to quite be like it is right now.
Yeah. The way I explain this to people a little bit is to talk about what happened to me last Wednesday when I got to Indianapolis. I wanted to meet an NFL executive, a pretty high-ranking one. He was done with his stuff for the day, and so at 5:00 I met him. He wanted to smoke a cigar and take a walk, and we walked along this canal path in downtown Indianapolis, which is absolutely lovely. And Indianapolis is such a livable city. I really like it. But anyway, we walked 3.2 miles, came back, he finished his cigar and discussed everything from A to Z in the National Football League over those 60 to 65 minutes. So that was fun. And then went out and had dinner, met with a couple more people. And then at 11:15 that night, had a session with a general manager that lasted past midnight at his hotel. Those are the kind of things, those are the reasons why people like in our position, we want to go to the combine. It isn't necessarily about trying to figure out which quarterback is going to get pick number one. It's still so early for that. It's March 6th right now. And so we have 7 weeks before the draft. We don't know that. But anyway, we hope that the combine stays in Indianapolis. But again, the NFL will seek money and will do what it does. So, Myles, let's start off by talking about the quarterback market right now in a lot of different ways. We're going to talk about the current veteran quarterbacks, the possible franchised quasi-free agent quarterbacks, and then we'll talk about the college quarterbacks, and we will lead into Bryce Young after all of this discussion. So I have two thoughts about Derek Carr and about what exactly his contract means. So obviously, you probably have seen it by now. Derek Carr signs with the Saints, and Derek Carr signed with them for 4 years, $150 million. And I put that in air quotes because it's really a 3-year, $100 million contract. In the 4th year, the $50 million salary is totally unguaranteed. He's not going to see $50 million in 2026. Just not going to happen. This contract is a 3-year, $100 million contract that basically all but guarantees Derek Carr $70 million. A nice contract. But I saw a lot today. Oh my God, he got rewarded for leaving the Raiders and all that other stuff. Look, people have to line up with quarterbacks. And so people are going to need quarterbacks at a reasonable price. For the New Orleans Saints to get their quarterback for the next 3 years, average $33 million, a guy who's got a few pelts on the wall, although I think he's really damaged right now. I don't think, first of all, it's not a lot of money in today's standards, to be spending $33 million a year on a quarterback when we're probably going to see Daniel Jones get between 40 and 45. So I thought the Saints made a good deal. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I like this move for the Saints. I don't know how much I love it for Derek Carr. Just Because look, Sean Payton's not there anymore. And, we saw last year Pete Carmichael leading that offense. It was okay. It was functional at times, but it was not what we'd seen with Sean Payton as the play caller. And, you go back to that year Sean Payton was suspended, the same sort of thing happened. So we'll see. It's not like Derek Carr is a young guy that needs to be developed, right? This is a veteran quarterback. We know who he is. We know because he's been in the league for a very long time. And he's had exposure to a bunch of different offensive systems. And I think that helps him going into the season where he's going to be, I believe, 32 years old. He's a veteran guy. He understands things, right? So his leadership ability also is something that I think helps the New Orleans Saints. But you're in that NFC South division. Does this make the Saints the favorites? I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Peter? Even with all the instability going on around that division?
I think it's too early to say because we don't know. We don't know who's playing quarterback for Carolina.
Right.
We don't know who's playing quarterback for Tampa. We don't know who's playing quarterback for Atlanta. Now, we think that Desmond Ridder probably is going to play quarterback for Atlanta. I had a good conversation with Falcons people at the scouting combine. And I would just say this about their situation. I think Atlanta is interested in investigating the whole situation about Lamar Jackson, but I cannot believe that they would offer him a contract that will be fully guaranteed. Look, we'll get to this in a moment, but what I wrote in my column this week is simply that, and I believe it's really the only solution now, offer Lamar Jackson a short-term, 2 years, probably, maybe 3, but 2 years, fully guaranteed contract. And, Lamar Jackson thinks, I guess, I have not heard from him, haven't talked to him, but Lamar Jackson thinks he is worth a multi-year guaranteed contract. Well, I'd give him 2 years, but I wouldn't give him longer than that. If you give him 2 years, then again, he's going to be in the same situation at age 28. And instead of locking himself in for 45-ish over 4 or 5 years, he'd be locking himself in for 40 or 45 over 2 years. And then he'll be able to hit the jackpot again when who knows what a quarterback is going to be worth, in 2025 or 2026, 65, 70 million a year. I don't know. But it's going up almost exponentially. But I don't know what Atlanta is going to do, but I assume they're going to start Desmond Ridder. We know that Tampa Bay is going to do something at quarterback more than just hand the job to Kyle Trask. And we also know that the owner in Carolina, David Tepper, is very impatient, and that I think most people think that they're going to try very hard to move up and to get the quarterback of their dreams high in the first round, trading up from the number 9 pick. So I agree with you, okay? I agree with you that right now, today, if they kick the games off on March 7th, that I probably would think New Orleans is the best team in the division. But it's like there's no division that is such a work in progress right now than the NFC South. So we'll see that. So that kind of brings us to Aaron Rodgers. As I say, by the time we hear from Aaron Rodgers, there's it could be as early as Tuesday of this week. With that decision having been made, it's clear that the Jets are very interested in Aaron Rodgers. I believe that the owner of the Jets, Woody Johnson, really wants Aaron Rodgers. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Aaron Rodgers wants to play football. Because, Myles, this. Aaron Rodgers is just a different guy. And we can all just sit here and say, oh, come on, Aaron Rodgers isn't gonna throw away, $59 million for 6 months of work, which is basically what he'd be signing up for. But don't be too sure about that. He's just a different guy. I think most people would say, give me the money, where do I sign? He's just different like that. But did you leave Indianapolis after talking to people with much of a different view than it's either Green Bay retire or the Jets?
Well, what I thought was interesting was hearing from Gutekunst, early on in the week. And it just, I don't want to say that they're out of patience with Aaron Rodgers, because I don't think that that's really what the case is. I think that everybody just wants to know what his choice is so that everybody can then make the decisions that they need to make. I mean, Green Bay has Jordan Love, but if Aaron Rodgers says, I don't want to play here anymore, then it becomes, okay, well, now we've got to send you elsewhere, and we need to figure out exactly where that is. So I am a little bit surprised that Aaron Rodgers has not necessarily made his intentions public at this point, because it seemed like, at least before the Super Bowl, when he's saying, I'm not going to hold Green Bay hostage, I'm going to go into this retreat, and then after that, I'm going to figure out what it is I'm going to do, and, you'll all hear from me, and blah, 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 and I'm not trying, and he said afterwards, I'm not trying to be dramatic, I'm just going through my process, and it is what it is. So I'm just curious to what it is that the process has led him to, because, you're in a room for 4 days by yourself and it's all dark and whatnot. That it scares me, because that just means a lot of time to think, right? I don't want to be with my thoughts that much by myself. So if he's been with his thoughts by himself that much, and he's something that he's comfortable with, then you would think that would be enough time to really make you understand what it is that you want to do. And so at this point, it's kind of like, well, why don't we know? Maybe he's still going back and forth on it. And if that's the case, fine. But I think everybody, especially the Packers, want to know exactly what it is that he wants to do, so then they can get on with the business of making that happen.
The more I think about Aaron Rodgers, the more I think that, he just might walk away. But I think if pressed to the wall, and again, we're going to know soon enough, I think he will play football this year. That's just a guess. I have zero inside information. As Rodgers said, I don't know, a week or so ago, when he ripped Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport, who just, the dudes have a job to do. I mean, come on. But as I looked at that and now look at Rodgers, quite honestly, I just look at a guy who I don't think, if I were him, that I would want to leave football on what happened last year. And Aaron Rodgers has this ethos that is, you hear it from him once a week, all through the season, that he hears the outside noise and he knows what people say about him. I think he would like to get in the octagon with Florio. And, basically, I think that Rodgers, I'm not saying he has rabbit ears, but Rodgers listens to what everybody says. And by the way, for those who say Rodgers will hate New York because if he doesn't win, he'll get killed and everything. Look, the Green Bay Packers are a national team, and if you were to just look at New York and think about it and say, oh boy, tough media, voracious media, the back pages of the Post and Daily News, it's a hard place to play. Honestly, I mean, think about it. Every team now, pretty much, if it's got great expectations, is a national team, and you're going to get chopped to bits on First Take and by Colin Cowherd and by Florio and by columnists. And think about it, Myles. In how many markets in the United States today do you legitimately feel suffocating pressure from the local media? I think that, I'm not saying it's totally gone away, but it's dissipated. because it used to be 15 years ago that the offices of the New York Jets, everybody would be getting the newspapers delivered to their doorstep in team offices. I can't find newspapers in most cities I go to now. That's number one. Now, clearly you can see them online, but, and again, I don't mean this in a really negative sense. I just mean it in a realistic sense. In an average NFL market, say, we were just in Phoenix for the Super Bowl. Do you think that the general manager of the Arizona Cardinals and the coach of the Arizona Cardinals and the big stars are really focused on what the Arizona Republic says? I mean, I don't think so. It's changed. Media has changed over the years, but I'm just saying I don't think that Aaron Rodgers will shy away from New York because of the big bad media. Myles, I want to just take 1 minute and talk about the combine and talk about the quarterbacks at the combine and say, in essence, okay, you had 3 guys who worked out, Bryce Young who didn't, and Anthony Richardson really was an impressive physical specimen. And to look at him and listen to him, I saw Michael Smith's interview with him, NBC's Michael Smith's interview with him, and he's really he's a good interview, a good kid, and I think he helped himself a lot at the combine. I think also CJ Stroud, I asked Daniel Jeremiah for his most impressive performers at the combine, and number 1 on his list was CJ Stroud, the quarterback from Ohio State. So, but also the one other point I want to make that I think is really important. The most important things, number 1, the tape that all the scouts are going to watch. Far and away, the most important stuff. Secondly, the pro day and the time that each team that's very interested spends individually with these guys. And just think of it in this way. If you're about to devote, somebody may trade up and trade 3 first-round picks to go get, say, CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, and so in order to do that, you have to feel really good about the person as well as the player, period.
Yes.
And so the key time in this thing is from March 22 to 30. In that 9-day period, March 22 to 30, there are going to be all 4 pro day workouts for all 4 of these quarterbacks. And it's not just the workout per se, which is designed to make the quarterback look good. It is the dinner the night before the event with a GM, a coach, and a club president from one team. It's the dinner after the event. It's, the hour and a half he spends on the board with another team. It's all this stuff. And so I wouldn't think that much about what happened at the scouting combine with workouts, as Detroit coach Dan Campbell said, that are being held in your pajamas. So I don't want to be overly negative about the combine, but there's 1,200 media people there every year, and we all probably treat it as more important than it really is.
Yeah. What I try to get out of those kinds of things is just, how do guys come off? I was listening to Will Levis. I got to Hendon Hooker and Max Duggan in their press conferences on Friday. And, you just listen to them and you just kind of want to hear, okay, do they sound like a quarterback? Do they look like a quarterback? Because there's not much else that we can really tell in a media session. And, a lot of these guys have been being QBs for most of their lives. So they understand how to do different things and they understand how to come off to the media. And they all sounded pretty impressive to me. And so when it's that, and then you see what they do on the field, right, you just don't want to see them be kind of overwhelmed and have a bad workout against air. Because if they look good against air, good. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. If they don't look good against air, that's going to make you say, what else do we have to look at?
Yeah.
So those things make you think, all right, well, CJ Stroud, yeah, he looked good. That's good. That's a box checked, right? You just can kind of go back and look at the film and confirm those things. Now, Will Levis, he was a little more inconsistent. That's not something you necessarily want to see. All right. So that's another thing where you go back and you look at the film and you're saying, okay, is this what I was really seeing on the film before? And then you got a guy, in Richardson, who is an unbelievable athlete, but I still think he might need a little bit more seasoning. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the greatest quarterback in the league right now sat for his first year in Patrick Mahomes. So that's okay too. And then you also got somebody who intrigues me, Peter, and Hendon Hooker. And I don't know where we would be talking about him if he didn't tear the ACL, because Tennessee's offense was great while he was that quarterback. So there are going to be options for teams in what it is that they want to do, whether it's at the top of the draft, whether it's at the bottom of the first round and the second round, et cetera. But, there's no guy that makes you like want to stand up on your chair like an Andrew Luck did, or maybe even Trevor Lawrence did, and say, holy smokes, that's the one guy we've got to get. Bryce Young, probably the closest to it, but you talk about the size and everything, there are still flaws, and there are flaws with all these guys. So it's going to be interesting to see where they end up going.
Agreed, totally. The one other point I think I would like to make about just the college guys, we're going to talk in the second half of the podcast after Bryce Young, who's coming up. We're going to talk about why every one of these guys has a question mark about him, but we are also talking about getting a one this year and then 2 future ones, probably as the floor for the compensation for whoever you trade for. So we'll talk about that on the other side. But first, let's go to my conversation that I had in Indianapolis with Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. I think you'll get a good sense of who exactly he is from this conversation I had with him. Back at the scouting combine, I'm here with Bryce Young, the quarterback from Alabama. And Bryce, the huge question that you're obviously getting everywhere is about your size. And I wonder, when teams ask you about that here at the combine, what do you say to them, and what do you talk about to get them, hopefully for you, not as concerned about your size?
Yeah, I've been this size my whole life. I definitely didn't shrink anytime recently, and I'm comfortable with myself. I'm confident in my abilities. I know what I can do, and again, there's stuff that's out of my control, but at the same time, again, I know myself. I feel like I played at a in the highest conference in the college level, and I think that's prepared me. So I'm super excited for this next challenge. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of hard work, but it's something I'm ready for and I'm excited for.
Is there anything about you that would watch a guy like Drew Brees or Russell Wilson and say, I mean, Drew Brees threw for more yards than anybody in history other than Tom Brady. If he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of people that have paved the way, for smaller quarterbacks. A lot of people that have done it at a really high level, and those are guys that have definitely inspired me a lot growing up. Guys I look up to, and I have so much respect for guys like that, and I think that. I don't think their success necessarily entitles me to anything, but again, it's a good source of inspiration for me. And again, I know I have to work. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of dedication, but there's nothing I'd rather be doing.
What do you weigh right now?
Yeah, I'm around the 200 range.
Yeah,
but I guess we're gonna figure out the official one pretty soon. Everyone keeps asking. It's gonna come so soon. It's like tomorrow.
Yeah, and so the one thing about spread fields now, both in college and in pro football. If it were tight, it would seem to me to be kind of a disadvantage for a shorter quarterback. But when the fields are spread and you have more lanes that you can see, how much do you think that helps your game, the fact that fields have now been spread out both in college and pro football?
Yeah, I think that, from at the quarterback position, I think that helps us a lot. Like you said, just being able to process, being able to put more stress on the defense at times with being things a little more spread out. But I think whether you're in those condensed formations, you're spread out. At the end of the day, you gotta make sure you're getting through your reads, you're processing your things, seeing things clearly. And again, that's something I pride myself in, and I know it's going to be an even bigger challenge at the next level. So I'm going to do everything I can to prepare, put myself in the best situation, and learn. So that I can try to process efficiently.
What would you say is the most interesting or the best trait or thing that you take from playing for Nick Saban?
Yeah, I think for playing for Coach Saban, it's just that lack of complacency. I'm making sure that I'm pushing myself and never satisfied with what I'm doing. And again, a lot of that comes from Coach Saban. Obviously, he's had so much. Legendary, has so much success there. Have coached some of the greats, won so many championships. But still, every day you can see him pushing himself. See him upholding the standard individually and then holding us all accountable as a team. And I think that's something that's really rubbed off on me. Being able to see that so consistently. It makes me understand that regardless of what goes on, whether it's a good game, bad game, whatever it is, I have to make sure I keep getting better, keep pushing myself and holding myself to that standard.
Playing for Bill O'Brien, who now goes to the New England Patriots, it's like, I wonder, what do you take from Bill O'Brien, and how do you think he helped you become a better quarterback?
Yeah, Coach OB, he's helped me so much. Came in from the NFL level, and then obviously now he's back there. So a lot of that mentality. There's a lot of things schematically that we've been able to talk about. But on top of that, the responsibility that he gave me, and the freedom and the trust that he gave me, in the run game, in the pass game, protections, everything like that. He put a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, and that's what allowed me, I feel like, to grow to the player that I am. Him trusting me to do so much, him kind of giving me the freedom. Once I earned that freedom and that trust from him, I'm super grateful for that. And he always supported me, always had my back. There's a lot of football conversations that we were able to have that definitely increased that knowledge that I have now. So I'm super grateful for OB, and I know he's going to kill at the next level.
What has been the experience here talking to teams, talking to coaches, maybe guys you have only seen on TV before?
Yeah, it's surreal. Again, me being here, like you said, talking to teams, talking to coaches, and just being able to soak that knowledge in. Seeing how they coach me, being able to learn a little bit about their systems, what they're looking for, their philosophies, along with doing my best to communicate, what I see, what I believe, and all that stuff. It's been, I'm super grateful for this process. I feel like I'm walking out of here with so much knowledge, so much wisdom, and again, like you said, there were a lot of coaches, a lot of people that I've looked up to and been able to admire from afar, and now being able to meet them and talk ball and to get that knowledge, I'm super grateful for that opportunity.
Do you feel competitive with the other guys, other quarterbacks at the top of the draft? Do you watch C.J. Stroud? I mean, you go way back with C.J. Stroud.
Yeah.
Do you watch C.J. Stroud and say, I'm better than this guy? Or how do you look at it? Look at the competition between you guys?
For me, honestly, I've always been someone who's been self-motivated, and I really just push myself to be the best version of myself. Again, I obviously what other people do, I can't control. So for me, what's important for me is to push myself to be the best version of myself, and especially in this class, I'm like you said, I'm super close with CJ. That's my brother, and a lot of other people in this class, I know really well, and we always, I root for all of them. We all root for each other, all support each other. We kind of share that a lot of similarities. And we know what it's like being in each other's shoes. So watching those guys, I've watched a lot of them on tape, and I've been able to learn from them. I'm super happy for all the success that they've had, and for me, I just try to be the best version of myself.
Last thing, Dan Orlovsky of ESPN put out a throw that you made at Alabama last year, and what was so interesting about the throw is that he said, basically, this is an NFL throw because if you watch, he almost stares at the middle safety. Okay, he knows he's throwing the ball to the right. Okay, but he almost stares down the middle safety so that he can't get over there in time. And you knew that you were going to throw the ball, I don't know, maybe 25 yards, corner route to the right. How much of an education about all levels of football have you had, and do you feel like, because there will be pressure on you to play very early in the NFL, which is not very easy to do. What about the preparedness of plays like that to be ready early on?
Yeah, I think I've gotten a tremendous amount of guidance from the coaches and people around me. I've been blessed to have the coaches that I've had that have instilled, so much knowledge into me. And, I think you say yourself, like you said, that preparation, that's something that I pride myself in. And, I obviously know that this next step, this next challenge, I'm going to have to be more prepared than ever. I feel like the knowledge that I've learned in the past, on top of what I look to gain, and from my my future coaches and all the people around me, we're all going to trying to be prepared. And that's a challenge that I'm definitely looking forward to.
Bryce Young of Alabama, good luck in your NFL career.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. My thanks to Bryce Young. My thanks to Morgan Miller, my producer, videographer in Indianapolis, for her work getting the Bryce Young conversation done. Soon, you will hear from, I had another conversation there with CJ Stroud. So soon in a future podcast, you'll hear the words from the Ohio State quarterback. So let's get to part 2 of the pod, where we talk about several different things other than just strictly quarterbacks. But Myles, let's start off with my conversation that I wrote about in my Football Morning in America column this week with Chicago general manager Ryan Poles. And so Ryan Poles is obviously in his second year. He's only, he's in his mid-30s. He's a very kind of optimistic, sort of quiet guy, but he's a very much of a football traditionalist. He played football at Boston College, and then obviously he started on the scouting trail soon after he left BC. And so he basically has risen through the ranks, and this is his first big deal. And I sat with him for about 50 or 60 minutes on Saturday morning in his hotel room, 19 floors above downtown Indy. And I got the impression that if you want to make a deal with Ryan Poles right now, you're going to have to blow him away. Otherwise, he's going to wait, and he's going to let teams get more and more excited about these quarterbacks. Another reason why you need to wait until the end of March, when teams get to meet with these guys and a coach says to his general manager, I really want CJ Stroud. Let's see what we can do to try to move up to get CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or whatever. But Myles, your thoughts on the Bears at number 1 and how much of a hard bargain can they afford to drive right now?
I think they're in a great spot. I mean, because even though these quarterbacks are flawed, a lot of teams still need one. And, coaches sometimes say, if I see a player do something once, I can coach him to do that a bunch of times. So you can coach out the flaws, basically, right? So if you fall in love with one of these guys, you go on a workout, you put them on the board, and you see that quarterback do this, and you guys are speaking the same language. And basically, as you were just saying, Peter, you fall in love with that guy, then you're going to want to trade up because you want to make sure you get him, because once you get the franchise QB, then everything else can fall into place around that. And if it takes 2 first-round picks, if it takes 3 first-round picks, 3 first-round picks and a third and a fourth or whatever it is, you want to do that because it means that you've got the guy. And once you have the guy, you're in a much better position than you would be otherwise. So from that perspective, the Bears think that they already have their guy. Right? Ryan Poles makes it pretty clear that they want to see things through with Justin Fields. And when you see the kind of explosive plays that Justin Fields put out there last year, you absolutely understand that. So it's so interesting now that, if not for the Texans making that comeback against the Colts, then we're having a completely different conversation right now here at the beginning of March than we are. And, if you're the Chicago Bears, yeah, maybe there would be some interest at number 2 overall, but from number 1 overall, you've got the Texans still right there at number 2, and they would probably want to be able to go up to number 1, maybe not trade as much as they would have to if they were further back, so that they can ensure that they get the quarterback that they want. And then if you're the Bears and you're at number 2, well, then why wouldn't you want to necessarily look at who can come up in that top 10 and get the quarterback that they want, but you don't want to go too far, right? I mean, maybe you want to go down to 4, maybe you want to go down to 7, maybe you don't want to get past there because, I mean, as Ryan Poles was saying to you, they don't want to lose one of their blue chip players, right? Those top guys that they've got rated on their draft board, and they don't have, more than 10 of them. So there are a lot of things that the Bears can do right now to ensure that they get maximum value for that number 1 overall pick. But yeah, if I'm Ryan Poles, I want to make it known I am open for business, as he did with you. And we'll see if somebody can come in and absolutely blow me away to make sure that they get the guy that they want. And it allows us as the Chicago Bears to then build our future with a bunch of high picks.
I think one of the things that you just said is something that I've thought a lot about ever since I walked out of that room with Ryan Poles, and that is building the future with high picks. Because if you think about it, there's a very good chance that for as long as Ryan Poles is a general manager in the NFL, he will never have an opportunity like this in his life, ever, not even close. So here's what, the only reason I bring that up is that, in my opinion, because of what we have seen in the last few years, okay, and I'm going to bring up one as an example, because I had somebody, let's just call him somebody with knowledge of the Carolina Panthers thinking, tell me last night, my last phone call of the weekend, tell me last night that I wouldn't be so sure about David Tepper, going so all in on one of these quarterbacks, because they think that Chicago is basically going to ask you to denude 3 drafts to get this quarterback. And although you're nowhere if you don't get a quarterback, there's also the thought that if you don't have people to put around him, if you don't have enough offensive skill players to put around him, should you really be trading for this quarterback in this? But I'll just make this point. So going from number 9 to number 1, which Carolina would have to do to take the kind of player that it really hopes to be able to take. If you equate that, try to think of a trade, in my opinion, something that could be very close to that is in 2021, Miami and San Francisco trading so that San Francisco moved up from 12 to 3. Now, 12 to 3 is pretty similar to 9 to 1, except if there's an Andrew Luck or a Peyton Manning or whatever involved in the draft, or Joe Burrow, that there's almost a singular person at the top of the draft. There really isn't that this year. So I can equate these two things. And just think about this. When Miami traded down from 3 to 12, think about what they got in return. They got the 12th overall pick in 2021. They got first and third round picks in 22, and they got a first round pick in 23. Right now, and they picked Trey Lance. Mm-hmm. I will not take to go that number of picks. I absolutely unequivocally would not take less than that if I were trading from 1 to 9. So in other words, if I'm Ryan Poles, I am saying, let's just put this on a scale and measure it. If a team is going to give 3 1s and a 3 to move up from 12 to 3, you've got to be able to say the exact same thing to move from 9 to 1. And maybe you've even got to give a little bit more, like a 2 instead of a 3. So again, I think Ryan Poles is going to get a landmine or a gold landmine, is going to get a gold mine of picks for this guy. And if I'm him, I am taking it right up to the end. And if I don't get my offer, if somebody chickens out, he told me he's already got a 24 and 20. He's got first rounders in 24 and 25 on the table. And if I can't do better than that, maybe when it gets to be you're on the clock with your pick that day, maybe you say, am I going to take it, or am I just going to sit where I am and take Will Anderson, the pass rusher from Alabama? So in my opinion, Ryan Poles in the driver's seat. I would love my position if I were him right now.
I mean, you could do worse than taking Will Anderson, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That looks like a guy who is going to be an absolute impact player in this league. And I think we know that when you're looking at defenses, you need that kind of dynamic pass rushing presence, whether it comes from the interior like the Rams with Aaron Donald, or it's the edge with guys like Nick Bosa or whoever, right? Or Chris Jones is also an interior guy. I feel like I should mention because he just won the Super Bowl. You need that. So if you're building your team and you want more high picks, you need the Chicago Bears. Absolutely. That's something you want. But if you got to pick number 1 overall and it's Will Anderson, that's not a bad thing at the end of the day. At least that's what I think.
So there's 2 teams. I had many conversations about teams and who might trade up when I was in Indianapolis. And one of the teams that's thinking about it, one of a veteran, let's just say a veteran front office person for this team said, we're tired of the Band-Aids. So think about that, Miles. What teams in the top 10 would be most tired of the Band-Aids? Number 1, Indianapolis. Yeah. They've had 5 different starting quarterbacks in the last 5 years. I mean, on opening day, they've had a different starting quarterback 5 straight years. And then the Carolina Panthers, who essentially have an owner who's very impatient, very wealthy, and just wants this problem solved. And so when I look at the Carolina Panthers, the one thing I say is that, and we saw it with Stephen Ross in Miami, we've seen it with other owners who are fabulously wealthy. They think, I'm going to throw money at this problem and I need to make it go away. It's a little different with the quarterback market, but I just think that my gut feeling, it's going to be Carolina or the Indianapolis Colts, who probably will want to give the most to move up to number 1.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially you're talking about the Colts and the Band-Aids and everything that's gone on since Andrew Luck suddenly retired has just been this kind of weird and kind of bad merry-go-round, right? Phillip Rivers was effective in the year that he was with the Colts. Obviously, they made it to the postseason. But then you look at Carson Wentz, right? You look at Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz wasn't as much of a disaster until the end of the season. Matt Ryan was a disaster of a free agency, of a trade that they made to acquire him, right? That just did not work. And frankly, it might have cost a lot of general managers their job, but Chris Ballard is still there. And so he's got another shot with Shane Steichen. And I think we know enough about Shane Steichen's coaching to know that he can train up a young guy. Look at what he did with Justin Herbert. And look at what he did with Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia, really completely retooling that offense for the specific quarterback, calling plays for the specific quarterback. I think that bodes well for what could happen with Indianapolis, whether they go up and they trade and maybe they get to number 1, maybe they get to number 2 if they have to, whatever it happens to be, if the Texans happen to move up to number 1. But I think that they're in a pretty decent spot, either at number 4 or if they move up, to get a quarterback and get that guy on the right track, in part because of who they have as their head coach.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest thing to consider going forward when you try to figure out who might make that deal what coach will be exceedingly motivated to make the deal? I think Frank Reich will be. What owner will be exceedingly motivated? Obviously David Tepper, and then I also look at the Indianapolis Colts. Chris Ballard, man, this is the last dance for Chris Ballard. He's got to get this right with this quarterback. And also the new coach, Shane Steichen, he didn't come in to have Sam Ellinger be his starting quarterback. So there's going to be some major changes there. And Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, clearly is going to want a huge upgrade at quarterback. So anyway, we'll see what happens. Myles, let's talk about the quarterback who came into the league 7 years ago, Carson Wentz. I was kind of blown away a week ago as we got prepared to do this show when a tweet came out from @Commanders, which said, very simply, this is all it said: we have released the following players. S, meaning safety, S, Bobby McCain, QB, Carson Wentz. That's it. Nothing like, hey, thanks for the effort, Carson, or whatever. Nothing. It was just a little chilly, to say the least. And so I just thought about it, and I said, think of the immense downfall in the life and the career of Carson Wentz. And so I added everything up. Carson Wentz in his career went 46-1. He has made $129 million. As Ian Rappaport said, he was at the combine with his agents. He wants a job. He still wants to be a quarterback in the NFL. But I basically went through what it costs. It's not only Philadelphia paying him 79, Indy paying him 21, Washington paying him 28 million. It isn't only that. It's the fact that those three franchises, to acquire Carson Wentz, either to acquire the draft pick to pick him in Philadelphia's case, or to trade for him in the cases of the Colts and Commanders, traded 3 first-round picks, a 2nd-round pick, 4 third-round picks, and a 4th-round pick. That's 9 picks altogether, all of them in the top 100 of the last 6 drafts. And so last 7 drafts, excuse me. And so Carson Wentz is a pleasant guy. I've had a nice relationship with him, probably up until now. But I've had a very nice relationship with him. He's a good human being. But the fact is, in my opinion, I would argue that no player in NFL history has cost so much and delivered so little. That's what I wrote. And online today, I mean, I guess I understand people are saying, hey, he went 11-2 in 2017. And even though he got hurt, he helped the Eagles win the Super Bowl that year. Absolutely. He does deserve credit for that. And an injury knocked him out of there. So, again, I feel for the guy. But a lot of people get hurt. A lot of people have setbacks in their lives. And what happens? They come back and they're great again. Carson Wentz came back, was never great again. I'd argue was barely good. And now you've got the Washington Commanders releasing him in a bizarrely chilly tweet that, to me, just says it all about what has happened in the life and time of Carson Wentz. And Myles, I'm assuming you probably saw this item, but we haven't discussed this. We haven't talked. I'm really curious what you think of sort of Wentz's impact in the game, and whether you would say, oh, there's got to be 20 guys who have been bigger busts and cost more in compensation and draft compensation than Carson Wentz.
Peter said impact in the game. What impact, right? I mean, if we got to go back to the first half plus of the 2017 season before he, got injured and tore the ACL in a game I happened to be at and covering at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum against the Rams. Look, I don't really know what we're doing. He had flashes in 18 and in 19, especially, when he was toward the end of the season. I think it was in 19 where he was really kind of carrying that team. And then they got to the playoffs, and then he suffered the concussion, and then it was basically over there, and then they drafted Jalen Hurts, and he didn't respond well to that. He was sacked the most times in the league, tied for the league lead in sacks in 2020, despite the fact that he played 4 fewer games than the other sack leader. So I've never been one to really see what exactly we're supposed to think positively about with Carson Wentz, at least from the 2020 season on. I just don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, and it's funny because, a couple of years ago, we were kind of at the same point with Jared Goff, right? And now Jared Goff has gone to Detroit. He has revived his career. Ben Johnson, their play caller, offensive coordinator, has been great with him. Dan Campbell's been great. They don't even feel like they need to draft a quarterback right now because Jared Goff has been that guy. So things can happen to you, but it's how you respond to it. Yeah. And frankly, Carson Wentz just never really responded all that well to the adversity that he was dealt. And now, I mean, would you really want him to be on your roster as a backup quarterback? Would you feel confident in him as a backup? I don't know that I would.
The only way I would is if I were, let's say, Andy Reid, and I think it's a natural for him to go play with Andy Reid. I think it was okay, but what I would want to do, Myles, and this is absolutely essential, I want to sit across the table from him because I've heard that he became an uncoachable player at times. And so I want to say, hey, listen, the way we're going to structure this contract, the way we're going to do this, we need you to prove yourself to us. Yeah. That's the way I would do it. And if you wouldn't do that, give me, I don't know, give me Andy Dalton. And I know everybody's going to say, oh, that's ridiculous. Is it? I don't think it is. I just don't think it is. And while I wouldn't be shocked if he made somewhat of a comeback, Carson Wentz has to rearrange who he is as a person and a player. And he's got to throw himself on the mercy of a coach and a coaching staff and say, I'm modeling clay. I'll do whatever you tell me. That's what he has to do, I think. Anyway, last thing I want to talk to, I just want to get into free agency a bit. And for those who don't really follow it, just to understand that free agency will essentially begin next Monday, March 13. And there's this thing in the NFL that's called the legal tampering period. And it is basically a 48-hour window where all the deals get done, essentially. You can't sign them officially, but all of them verbally get done. And so when we record our podcast next week, Myles and I will know where a lot of these players are going. But in my opinion, the best player on the market this year, and I'm not talking about the quarterbacks who are going to get tagged or who may get tagged or like Geno Smith. Let's just talk about all non-quarterbacks, okay? I think the best player in the market is Javon Hargrave, defensive tackle for the Eagles. And then I think there's 2 excellent corners, Jamel Dean of the Bucs, James Bradbury of the Eagles. And then after that, I think there's 2 good tackles, Orlando Brown, who was informed by Kansas City general manager Brett Veach that he will not be franchised, so he will be hitting the market, and San Francisco right tackle Mike McGlinchey, who probably is not as good as Orlando Brown, but I don't think he will be as costly as Orlando Brown. So, and I think for all the rest of, the free agents, Myles, I really respect Pro Football Focus. I think it's a fantastic organization, really, really smart people looking at football. And when I looked at their list of the top 100 free agents, number 7 on the list was Jakobi Meyers. the Patriots wide receiver. We all like Jacoby Myers. He's a nice second or third receiver on your team, but to have him number 7 on the list, and I think probably pretty clearly the top wide receiver in free agency, that just shows you what a crummy class it is. And again, I like Jacoby Myers. I think he is a good contributing player, but he's not somebody who's going to change your team. So that's sort of the way I view free agency. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Jacoby Myers is going to be a wide receiver 1 for anybody. And that,
Right.
to your point, that's kind of just what it is, right? I mean, unless we see some more veteran receivers get released over the next week or so, then this really is not a very strong receiver class. And that's okay. You can go into it. You can go into a team and you can become something that you haven't been before. You know, I think about that with Robert Woods when the Rams signed him in 2017, and everybody was like, what the hell are you doing? And then you see him on the field, and, you know, he was really, really good. He was the top receiver for the Rams until Cooper Kupp kind of took over that role. So there are opportunities to get better. But I mean, you mentioned the guy that honestly I feel like is probably one of the top players on the free agency board, and that's Orlando Brown. And when you've got a left tackle out there who's been as good as Brown has been, who's been as consistent as Brown has been, who has been a part of the kind of offenses that he has been a part of, and excelled, I think that that's somebody that a lot of teams are going to want to bring to the table and say, hey, man, yeah, we would love for you to come and be our left tackle for years and years and years to come. And by that same token, Kansas City was trying to do that when they traded for Orlando Brown a couple of off seasons ago. They really remade their offensive line, and it worked, obviously, because Kansas City just won the Super Bowl, right? But I think, Peter, if there's anybody who has earned the right to sort of say, all right, you know, we thank you, Orlando Brown, but there's a number that we don't want to go over, and we're not going to do that. And we're not going to franchise you because we need to find a long-term solution this offseason at left tackle, and we believe we can do that. Brett Veach has earned the right to do that. I mean, think about all of the picks that they hit from last year's draft, all of those different contributors that they had that were rookies. Now, you have a situation where, yeah, Brett Veach also traded Tyreek Hill, and they remade the wide receiving core, and Patrick Mahomes is better than ever. If anybody can do this and figure out a solution at left tackle, it's gonna be him. So I think it's very interesting that the Chiefs are letting their left tackle kind of go, and who knows, perhaps they work out something once Orlando Brown hits the open market and maybe things aren't quite as lucrative as he thought they would be. But I think Brown's going to be playing elsewhere, and I think the Chiefs are going to have a new left tackle, and that's somebody that they absolutely have to get right. I think Brett Veach probably is going to make that happen.
Yeah, I think the more I look at this, as we learn that Brett Veach was not going to franchise Orlando Brown, what really occurred to me, Miles, is that this sort of has a tributary into last year when Orlando Brown wanted $1 jillion a year ago. And I forget what the numbers were exactly, but he really wanted huge money. And Kansas City, basically, they didn't inflame the situation. They said, we're not going to do this. They just let it go. It simmered down, and finally he ended up playing for him. And look, players only have this opportunity once or twice in their careers.
Yes.
I applaud Orlando Brown for trying, for telling Kansas City that, hey, listen, I want what I have no idea what the numbers are that he's asking for, but he can ask for whatever he wants. But it's, in some ways, it's kind of like Lamar Jackson. He can ask for whatever he wants, but the team doesn't have to pay for it. And in this particular case, I still think he's got a very good chance of coming back and playing for Kansas City, unless Team X says, we'll give you $28 million a year and, guarantee, or, with 60% guaranteed over the next 5 years. Then, of course, he's going to go.
Yeah.
But I think good for Orlando Brown in doing this. I think it's fine. And also good for Kansas City keeping its options open and understanding that Andy Reid is going to devote so much time, so much energy to both lines. He always has. And if I were Patrick Mahomes, I wouldn't be worried about who's going to play left tackle. Of course, I'd want Orlando Brown there, but if not, we'll handle it. So I don't view this as any sort of existential crisis for Kansas City to, try to be able to repeat as Super Bowl champions. Myles, we have really beat up the clock again this week. I don't know how anybody can listen to an hour and 20 minutes of our palaver, and I don't think it's an hour and 20, but whatever it is this week, I just wanted to sort of download everything I was thinking in my head. You did too. I hope everybody appreciates it. And if you don't, here's the thing. It doesn't cost a dime. So all you did maybe was waste 70 minutes of your life while you were out walking the dog in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and had your AirPods in. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little something on this podcast. Myles Simmons and I will be back next week to really sort of rake over the crumbs in free agency and see what has happened and see, as was told to me over the weekend, this could be a year finally where teams let the dust settle for a while first after the first few guys go off, instead of going nuts and signing B players for $20 million a year. But anyway, we'll see what's going on next week. We appreciate you joining us this week, and we'll be back next week with another edition of the Peter King Podcast.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.